The office was too quiet for a Tuesday night. The city outside, New York, unrelenting and alive, buzzed with neon and movement, but up here on the 22nd floor of Helms & Company, there was only the hum of fluorescent lights and the rhythmic tick of an antique clock on the wall. It had been ticking for 12 years, ever since Daniel Hurst started working here. Its brass frame gleamed under the pale light, polished by the cleaners every Friday, but the sound had never changed. Steady, patient, exact. Daniel liked that about it. Numbers were like that too, faithful, consistent, incorruptible, until someone corrupted them. He sat alone at his desk, the rest of the accounting floor long deserted. The rows of cubicles stretched out like a graveyard of quiet machines and idle monitors. Only his corner was alive, lit by the pale blue glow of spreadsheets and the muted pulse of his computer's cooling fan. He leaned closer to the screen, his glasses slipping down his nose, eyes darting through columns of figures, formulas, and line items. The more he looked, the more something inside him tightened, a coil of unease wrapping around his gut. The numbers didn't add up. Not just a mistake, not just human error. Something deliberate, a pattern, hidden in the neatness. Daniel clicked through the ledger again, his fingers trembling slightly. The document was labeled Consulting Fees, Q3 Review. The amounts looked ordinary enough, each supported by a vendor ID and invoice number, but the routing codes were off. The same pattern repeated every 3 pages, like a pulse beneath the surface. Identical transfers to different shell entities, all funneled through a holding company in Delaware that technically didn't exist 2 months ago. He knew this company's entire financial skeleton by heart. He'd built most of it himself, system by system, ledger by ledger. There was no mistake. It was fraud, and it wasn't subtle. Daniel rubbed his temples. His tie was loosened, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his hair messy from hours of running his hands through it. He was exhausted, but he couldn't stop. His conscience wouldn't let him. He printed the ledger and spread it across his desk, marking each anomaly with a red pen. The sound of paper sliding under his fingers was sharp in the silence. He made notes in the margins, arrows connecting the transactions, building a map of deceit. When he was done, he leaned back and stared at the mess of papers. The numbers formed a pattern that was both elegant and terrifying. Someone had done this with care, with confidence. And whoever it was, they knew Daniel might find it. A noise behind him broke the stillness. The sound of shoes, soft leather on tile. He turned. Martin Crow, Chief Financial Officer of Helms & Company, stood in the doorway. "Working late again?" Martin's voice was smooth, the kind of voice that filled rooms during board meetings, confident and rehearsed. He was in his mid-40s, charming, with just enough gray in his hair to look trustworthy. He held a glass of something amber in his hand, probably bourbon from the decanter in his private office. Daniel tried to keep his tone neutral. "I found something that doesn't make sense in the Q3 statements." Martin smiled, stepping into the light. "You always do. That's why we love you, Dan. You never miss a decimal." "This isn't a decimal," Daniel said. "It's $5 million routed through phantom accounts." Martin's smile didn't falter, but his eyes, cold blue and sharp, shifted slightly. "That's a big accusation." "I'm not accusing anyone," Daniel said quietly. "I'm just saying it's wrong." Martin set his glass down on the edge of the desk, leaning forward slightly, his voice dropping. "And what exactly are you planning to do about it?" Daniel didn't answer right away. He looked back at the spreadsheets, at the proof he'd spent hours uncovering, and then at the man in front of him. "I'm going to report it," he said finally. "It's company policy." Martin sighed, a long, practiced sigh that sounded almost paternal. "Dan, come on, don't be naive. You've been here long enough to know how things work. There are adjustments, there are optimizations, there are arrangements. Every major firm does it. It's not fraud, it's flexibility." Daniel shook his head. That's not flexibility. That's lying. The CFO's expression hardened, the warmth slipping from his face. You're a good man, Dan. Maybe too good. But if you start making noise about this, it won't end well. For anyone. He picked up his glass and turned to leave, his reflection briefly visible in the window, a dark silhouette against the glittering skyline. Go home, he said over his shoulder. Sleep on it. Tomorrow you'll see things more clearly. When the door closed, Daniel sat in silence. He didn't go home. By dawn, the city was waking up. Yellow cabs streamed down Fifth Avenue. Coffee carts hissed steam into the air. And on the 22nd floor, Daniel printed copies. One for himself, one sealed in an envelope marked Compliance Department, Confidential. He placed the envelope on his supervisor's desk before anyone arrived. Then he packed his bag and walked out, down the marble steps of the building, into the pale morning light. The wind was sharp against his face, but it felt clean. He thought he'd done the right thing. He hadn't yet learned that doing the right thing often comes with a cost. 3 days later, he was called into the boardroom. The room was designed to intimidate. Long mahogany table, leather chairs, panoramic view of the skyline. The city stretched endlessly beyond the glass, as if reminding him how small he really was. The CEO, Raymond Helms, sat at the head of the table. Martin Crowe was beside him, unreadable. A corporate lawyer occupied the far end, her laptop open, fingers poised above the keyboard. Daniel, Helms began, his tone almost apologetic. You've been an asset to this company for over a decade. Your diligence, your integrity, it's unmatched. Daniel waited. He already felt the blade hidden in those words. But, Helms continued, sometimes integrity can clash with practicality. We operate in a competitive environment, and not everyone sees the same picture. Martin chimed in smoothly, like a conductor cueing an orchestra. We need people who can adapt, Dan. People who understand that sometimes the big picture requires flexibility. Daniel looked from one man to the other. You're firing me because I refuse to falsify the books. The lawyer cleared her throat. No one is saying that. We're simply restructuring. You'll receive a generous severance package and a positive reference. Helms folded his hands. You've earned that much. The words buzzed in Daniel's ears like static. He wanted to shout, to expose them right there, but something in their calm, unflinching faces stopped him. They weren't afraid. They had already cleaned the trail. They had power, and they knew he didn't. Daniel stood slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. You're making a mistake. Helms smiled faintly. We'll take our chances. Daniel left the building with nothing but a box of personal belongings, a coffee mug, a framed photo of his late father, and a notebook filled with financial notes that no one but him could understand. The security guard at the lobby avoided his eyes as he passed. Outside, the rain had started. It fell in slow, deliberate drops, tapping against the box he carried like an echo of the clock he'd left behind. By the time he reached the subway, his shirt was soaked through. He didn't look back. In the weeks that followed, Daniel tried to move on. He applied for jobs. None called back. His reputation had quietly vanished, erased by whispers he couldn't trace. A single word followed him in every interview, though no one ever said it aloud: uncooperative. He sold his apartment, moved into a smaller one. He spent his days reading, his nights walking the city streets. He'd always believed numbers were pure, untouched by greed or ego, but now even they felt dirty. He thought often of his father, who had taught him that honesty was a kind of armor. The world can bruise you, his father used to say, but it can't pierce the truth. Now Daniel wondered if that armor had only made him an easier target. He began keeping a notebook, not of finances, but of observations, names, dates, fragments of what he'd seen, what he suspected, the shell companies, the transfers. It wasn't about revenge. Not yet. It was about keeping the truth alive, even if no one cared to hear it. Months turned to years. The world forgot Daniel Hurst. He took freelance work, tax auditing for small firms, private consulting for clients too minor to attract corporate eyes. He lived quietly, methodically. But beneath that quiet, something was growing, a sense of purpose he couldn't yet name. Every so often, he'd read in the business pages about Helms & Company. Their profits soared. Their CEO gave interviews about ethical leadership. Martin Crowe appeared in glossy magazines, photographed at charity galas, smiling with politicians and athletes. Each time Daniel saw those images, a pulse of anger flashed through him. Not loud, not wild, just steady, like the ticking of that clock. The truth hadn't changed. It had only waited. And though Daniel didn't know it yet, it was waiting for him too. On a quiet winter night, 5 years to the day since his dismissal, Daniel stood in a small office in Vermont. Snow drifted outside the window, thick and soundless. On the wall behind him hung a new kind of certificate, not for corporate excellence, but for forensic financial investigation and tax law. He closed his notebook, the one he'd started years ago, now filled cover to cover. The phone rang once, twice. He answered. "Mr. Hurst?" The voice was calm, official. "This is the Internal Revenue Service. We've reviewed your application and your record. We'd like to offer you a position as a financial investigator. Are you still interested?" Daniel looked out at the snow falling softly against the dark glass. For the first time in years, he smiled. "Yes," he said. "I am." He hung up the phone, switched off the light, and stepped into the cold night. Outside, the world was quiet again. But this time, the quiet wasn't loneliness. It was the calm before something larger. Something that would one day lead him back to the place he'd left behind. He didn't know it yet, but Helms & Company was already on the IRS's radar. And when the time came, it would be Daniel who followed the numbers to the end. Snow melted from Daniel's coat as he stepped into the federal building on Constitution Avenue. The polished floors reflected the morning light like water. Everything smelled faintly of coffee, paper, and purpose, a scent he hadn't known he'd missed until now. The receptionist looked up when he approached. "You must be Mr. Hurst," she said, with a polite professional smile. "They're waiting for you in room 304. He nodded, thanked her quietly, and followed the long corridor lined with framed photos, agents in the field, award ceremonies, archived newspaper clippings about takedowns and victories. For most people, they were history. For Daniel, they were a challenge. Inside room 304, 3 people sat around a rectangular table. A senior investigator with white hair and the posture of a man who'd seen everything. A woman in her 30s typing on a tablet, sharp-eyed and efficient, and a man in a navy suit who seemed to radiate authority even before he spoke. "Mr. Hurst," the man said, standing to shake his hand. "I'm Special Agent Cole. We've reviewed your background. Impressive record, and an unusual story." Daniel gave a small, cautious smile. "Unusual isn't always good." Cole chuckled. "Sometimes it's exactly what we need." He gestured for Daniel to sit. "We're building a new division, forensic compliance and tax enforcement. We need people who see through the noise. People who can follow money not just through numbers, but through human behavior. That's where you come in." The woman, Agent Lynn Walters, stopped typing. "We know about Helms & Co., she said matter-of-factly. "You left after filing an internal complaint that mysteriously disappeared." Daniel's gaze didn't waver. "You've done your homework." Cole leaned forward. "The kind of people who bury that sort of complaint, they're the ones we spend our lives chasing. You've already been in the lion's den. That gives you an edge." Daniel hesitated. Part of him wanted to forget that chapter of his life completely. But another part, the part that never stopped counting, never stopped noticing, knew he couldn't. "What exactly would my role be?" he asked. Cole smiled faintly. You'll be doing what you do best, following the truth in numbers. Only this time, you'll have a badge behind it. The weeks that followed blurred together. Training, certifications, protocols, briefings. Daniel adapted quickly. His mind, disciplined and methodical, thrived in the structure. He learned to read patterns of deceit like a second language. The way fraudsters layered fake identities, how offshore accounts looped through shell companies like veins in a labyrinth, how a single number could betray an empire if you knew where to look. He found himself strangely at peace within the chaos of investigation. Each case was a puzzle, and unlike corporate life, here the goal wasn't to protect anyone's reputation. It was to uncover the truth. Agent Walters, assigned as his partner, grew curious about him. "You ever miss the private sector?" she asked one afternoon, while they sifted through a stack of falsified tax records from a pharmaceutical firm. Daniel smirked faintly. "I miss the coffee machines, not the lies." She laughed. "You talk like you've seen things burn." He glanced at her. "I have." There was something about the way he said it, quiet, absolute, that silenced her follow-up question. Months passed, and Daniel built a reputation in the agency as the man who sees ghosts in numbers. Cases that had stalled for years suddenly cracked open after he touched them. He never raised his voice, never took credit. He just worked, precise and relentless, like the steady tick of that clock he'd left behind at Helms & Co. And yet, at night, when the office emptied and the fluorescent lights hummed in the silence, he sometimes found himself staring at the skyline, remembering. He thought about the boardroom, the rain, the envelope on the desk marked confidential. The humiliation hadn't faded. It had only calcified into something sharper. He didn't crave revenge, not in the cinematic sense of destruction. What he wanted was balance, correction, a world that finally admitted he'd been right. That chance came 2 years later. It began with a file, routine, unremarkable at first glance. A quarterly audit request on a mid-sized investment firm flagged for inconsistent tax remittances. The firm's name, Helms & Co. Daniel froze. The letters on the page might as well have been carved into him. He reread the line, Helms & Co. Me, Manhattan, NY. The same building, the same company, the same men. For a long time, he didn't move. Then, slowly, he reached out and closed the folder. "Everything all right?" Walters asked, glancing up from her own desk. Daniel's voice was calm, but his hand trembled slightly as he set the file aside. "Just an old ghost," he said. "I'll take this one." Walters frowned. "Are you sure?" "These are random assignments, Hurst. We can swap if you want." He looked at her. Steady, unreadable. "No, I think this one belongs to me." He started with the basics: income statements, tax returns, subsidiary filings. Helms & Company had grown, of course, now operating across several states, managing billions in client assets. On paper, everything gleamed with corporate perfection. But Daniel knew what perfection meant in this world. It meant a mask. He spent nights reviewing every line, every vendor, every overseas transaction. Patterns began to emerge, subtle but undeniable. Just like before. Circular transfers through offshore entities, layered expenses, untraceable consulting fees. They had gotten better at hiding it. But they hadn't gotten smarter. Each discovery hit Daniel with a strange mix of vindication and nausea. They were still doing it, the same deception that had cost him everything. The difference now was that he had the authority to do something about it. He compiled his findings meticulously, following the money trail across jurisdictions, cross-referencing filings and reconstructing the financial web. As the puzzle took shape, one name began to reappear. Crow Consulting Group, Martin Crow, the CFO, the man who had smiled while pushing him out the door. Daniel stared at the name for a long time, his jaw tightening. The next morning, he requested a full audit and investigation. The first official meeting regarding the case took place in a glass-walled conference room on the 7th floor. Cole led the session. Walters sat beside Daniel, taking notes. Helms & Co. Me, Cole began. Publicly clean, privately suspicious. What have we got? Daniel projected the financial map on the screen, a complex web of lines and connections, pulsing in blue. These are the main accounts, he said evenly. From here, funds are routed through shell companies in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. They appear as consulting fees, but there's no corresponding service record. The funds then reappear under Crow Consulting Group, which is privately owned by Martin Crow, current CFO of Helms & Co. Cole whistled softly. Bold. He didn't even bother hiding under another name. Daniel's tone didn't change. Arrogance is its own disguise. Walters leaned forward. So, what's the scale? Approximately $120 million over 5 fiscal years, Daniel said. Tax evasion, money laundering, securities fraud. The works. The room went still. Cole nodded slowly. You've done solid groundwork. Now we need hard evidence, direct links, communications, witness testimony. This won't be easy. These guys played dirty. Daniel met his gaze. I know. The investigation deepened over the next 6 months. Each day peeled back another layer of rot beneath the polished corporate surface. Daniel and Walters conducted interviews, subpoenaed bank records, traced offshore accounts. More than once they encountered resistance, missing documents, uncooperative executives, anonymous warnings. One night, Daniel returned to his car to find his tires slashed and a note tucked under the windshield. You should have stayed gone. He showed it to Walters without a word. She looked horrified. You think they know? They always know, he said quietly. But it doesn't matter. Why? Daniel's eyes hardened. Because I've already lost everything they can take. As the case grew, the team began calling it Operation Clean Ledger. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Daniel's obsession with the details bordered on manic precision. He slept 3 hours a night, his desk littered with coffee cups and printed statements covered in red annotations. But where others saw chaos, he saw music. A symphony of deceit waiting to be unraveled. Walters watched him one night, as the office clock struck midnight. You ever think you're too good for this job? She asked. He looked up, startled. I mean, she said, you don't just do this for a paycheck, you do it like you're exercising something. Daniel paused, then smiled faintly. Maybe I am. By early spring, they had enough to move. Cole called them into his office. The DOJ's on board. We've got the warrants. This is going down. Daniel exhaled slowly. The date was set. He couldn't sleep the night before. The city outside was eerily still, caught between winter and spring, as if the world itself was holding its breath. He sat by the window of his apartment, staring at the skyline. The Helms & Company building was just visible in the distance, a thin gleam of light among thousands. He thought of that last day. The boardroom, the rain, the box of belongings. Tomorrow he would walk back through those same doors, not as an employee, but as something else entirely. The morning came gray and cold. Federal vehicles lined the curb outside Helms & Company, engines idling. Agents adjusted bulletproof vests, loaded cameras, clipped badges to belts. Daniel stood among them, wearing the same calm expression he had the day he'd been fired. The only difference was the badge on his chest. Cole gave the signal. All right, people, let's bring some truth to Wall Street. They entered the building in formation, their footsteps echoing on the marble floors. Internal Revenue Service, one of the agents called. We have a federal warrant to search the premises. Employees froze mid-step. Phones stopped ringing. A secretary dropped her coffee. And then, silence. Daniel moved through the chaos like a ghost, retracing old paths. He passed the elevator lobby, the hallway to the boardroom, even the glass panel where his name had once been engraved in gold. He stopped when he saw him, Martin Crowe, standing at the far end of the corridor, face pale, eyes wide. It had been 5 years, but time hadn't softened the man's arrogance. He straightened his tie, forced a thin smile. "Well," Martin said, "if it isn't the prodigal accountant." Daniel's voice was calm. "Good morning, Mr. Crowe." Crowe glanced at the agents moving through the offices. "You think you're a hero now? You're just a bureaucrat with a badge." "Maybe," Daniel said. "But it's the same badge that's about to end your career." For a moment, their eyes locked. Predator and prey, though it was no longer clear who was which. Then Daniel turned away. "Search everything," he told the agents. "Every drive, every document, every off-site server. We're not leaving until the truth is on record." By evening, the evidence was undeniable. Accounts seized, emails recovered, financial trails exposed. The once glittering empire of Helms and Comey stood naked under fluorescent light, all illusion stripped away. As the executives were led out in handcuffs, Martin shouted over his shoulder, his composure cracking. "You think this changes anything, Hurst? The system will always protect people like us." Daniel didn't answer. He watched in silence as the doors closed behind them. Only when the building was empty did he allow himself to exhale. He walked through the deserted halls, past his old office. The desk was still there, dustier, smaller than he remembered. On it sat an old photo, the CEO and Martin shaking hands, smiling like gods. Daniel picked it up, studied it for a moment, then placed it face down. When he finally stepped outside, the city lights had come alive again, indifferent and eternal. The wind carried the faint scent of rain. Walters met him on the sidewalk. "It's done," she said softly. He nodded. "No," he said after a moment. "It started." She frowned. "What do you mean?" Daniel looked back at the building. "The truth doesn't end here. It spreads. That's the part they never understand." That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He stood by his window again, watching the city breathe. For the first time, he didn't feel anger, just quiet satisfaction. The numbers had told their story, and this time, people had listened. But in the stillness, he also felt something else, the echo of a deeper rot. Helms and Cumberby had fallen, but it was only one head of a hydra. And as he stared at the skyline, Daniel knew that the world of finance, greed, and deception stretched far beyond one corporation. The work was just beginning. He didn't yet know that the deeper he went, the closer he would come to a truth far more dangerous than he imagined. A truth that wouldn't just test his integrity, but his very humanity. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. New York lay under a gray shroud, a steady drizzle turning the city's edges soft and indistinct, as if the world itself was being slowly erased. The storm didn't bother Daniel. He welcomed it. It suited the silence that had settled over him since the raid. The noise of the headlines, the noise of celebration, even the noise of relief. All of it had faded now, leaving only the quiet after the storm. Helms and Comey was gone. Martin Crowe was awaiting trial. The world, for once, had agreed with him. The numbers hadn't lied. And yet, Daniel felt nothing. Not pride, not triumph. Just the dull emptiness that follows after a long war. It was as if, in exposing the company's corruption, he had also exposed the hollowness of his own purpose. For 5 years he had lived for that reckoning, and now that it had come, it left behind only silence. He sat by the window of his apartment, the lights of the city blurring behind streaks of rain. On the table beside him lay the newspaper. IRS hero exposes multi-billion fraud. His face, grainy and impersonal, stared back from the front page. They'd taken the photo outside the courthouse just after the indictments. He'd been looking away from the camera. The caption beneath read, "Daniel Hurst, the accountant who wouldn't lie." He turned the paper over and let it fall to the floor. Outside, thunder rolled over the river. He poured himself a cup of coffee that had gone cold and drank it anyway. His apartment was nearly bare. A bed, a desk, a few books, a file cabinet filled with reports. No pictures on the walls, no personal mementos. He had long ago given up the clutter of sentiment. Everything in his life now fit neatly into folders and lines of data. But as he sat there, something inside him itched. The feeling wasn't satisfaction. It was suspicion. The kind of quiet tension that came when numbers still whispered to him in the dark, telling him that something didn't quite add up. Helms & Company was supposed to be finished, but the pattern, the one he had followed to bring them down, didn't end cleanly. It stopped abruptly, like a thread cut mid-weave. And Daniel, a man who had lived his life chasing precision, could not ignore the loose ends. He opened the last report he'd written, Operation Clean Ledger, Final Review. He flipped to the appendix and stared at the final flow diagram. At first glance, it seemed complete. But one entity on the chart had no closure. Silver Point Holdings Limited, a minor offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The line connecting it to Helms & Co. ended without resolution. The funding should have stopped when the others were frozen. It hadn't. Daniel leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. Someone's still moving money. 2 weeks later, he was back at headquarters. Most of the team had moved on to other cases. Walters had taken leave. Cole was in Washington giving testimony. The building felt hollow, the echo of footsteps, the hum of distant printers. Daniel liked it that way. He requested access to the sealed financial data from the Helms case. The clerk hesitated. "Those files are under legal restriction," she said. "Post-trial audit only." Daniel gave a polite smile. "This isn't a new investigation, just quality assurance, compliance review." The clerk looked at his badge, sighed, and entered the code. 5 minutes, she said. "After that, the system logs you out automatically." 5 minutes is all I need. He downloaded the old transfer logs and cross-referenced them with recent offshore movements. And there it was. A ghost transaction, dated just a month ago. Silver Point Holdings, North Star Capital Partners. Amount, $4.8 million. Authorized by an inactive account linked to Helms & Company's old infrastructure. Daniel stared at the line of data. It was like seeing a pulse on a corpse. Someone was keeping the machine alive. He printed the document, folded it neatly, and slid it into his coat pocket. That night, he met with Walters at a small diner near Union Square. The place smelled of burnt coffee and nostalgia. She was already there, scrolling through her phone, her expression equal parts curiosity and fatigue. "You look like you haven't slept," she said when he sat down. "Neither have you," he replied. She smirked. "Fair." Then her expression softened. "I heard about the bonus and the commendation. Congratulations." He waved it off. "They're meaningless. The case isn't finished." Walters frowned. "What do you mean?" "Crow's in custody. The company's dismantled. It's over." He slid the folded printout across the table. She opened it, reading silently. Her brow furrowed. "This isn't possible. These accounts were frozen." "Not all of them," Daniel said. "Someone reactivated the transfer protocols under a proxy ID. That's not a mistake. That's a system-level override. Someone inside the financial regulatory network is still moving their money." Walters leaned back. "You're saying someone in the government is helping them?" Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he looked out the window at the reflection of neon lights in the rain. I'm saying corruption doesn't end just because you sign a warrant. You cut off one head, another grows back. This, he tapped the paper, is the next head. She hesitated, then folded the paper carefully and handed it back. You need to be careful, Dan. You're poking into places that don't want to be seen. He smiled faintly. That's what they said last time. Days turned into weeks. The more Daniel dug, the deeper the hole became. He traced Silver Point Holdings through a maze of intermediaries, each more obscure than the last. Shell corporations registered under false names, addresses that led to empty lots, directors who didn't exist. But every trail ended the same way, in Washington. Specifically with a firm called North Star Capital Partners, a supposedly independent asset management group that handled strategic investments for government contractors. The irony was sharp enough to taste. He brought his findings to Cole. The older man listened quietly, eyes narrowing as Daniel spoke. When he finished, Cole leaned back in his chair, exhaled, and said, "You're treading dangerous ground, Hurst." "I'm following the numbers," Daniel said simply. Cole's gaze hardened. "Numbers are safe. People aren't. You start pulling at threads connected to federal contractors, and you won't like what unravels. I'm telling you this as a friend. Let it go." Daniel met his eyes. "I can't. You taught me that once you start seeing the truth, you can't unsee it." Cole sighed. "Then be ready for what comes next." What came next was silence. Emails unanswered, calls redirected, access to databases quietly revoked. It was as if someone had flipped a switch, turning him from asset to liability overnight. He didn't need confirmation. He'd seen this before, the slow, polite suffocation of bureaucracy. So he worked alone. Nights spent in his apartment surrounded by printed ledgers and code traces. The walls slowly disappeared beneath maps of financial flows, sticky notes, and red thread connections. His life had become an investigation with no off switch. And yet, the deeper he went, the more the pattern began to twist into something human. Not just fraud, but power. Names surfaced in quiet whispers: government officials, defense contractors, and a lobby group connected to North Star. He realized then that what Helms and Cody had done wasn't an isolated crime. It was a doorway, one company among dozens used to funnel money through fake consultancies and inflated contracts. Crow hadn't been the architect. He'd been the accountant, the front man. The real architects were still in the shadows. Daniel's world, once made of clean numbers, was now full of ghosts. One night, near midnight, there was a knock on his door. He froze. He hadn't told anyone where he lived. He approached cautiously, peering through the peephole. A man stood outside, tall, wearing a dark trench coat, the brim of his hat dripping with rain. "Mr. Hurst?" the man called, voice calm. Daniel hesitated. "Who's asking?" "Special Agent Monroe, Department of Internal Affairs. We need to talk." Daniel opened the door slowly. Monroe stepped in, shaking off the rain. His eyes were sharp but tired, the kind of eyes that had seen too much. "You've been busy," he said, glancing at the papers covering the apartment walls. "Impressive work. Obsessive, but impressive." Daniel crossed his arms. "You're here about the Helms case." "Not exactly." Monroe reached into his coat and handed him a sealed envelope. "You've been reassigned. Effective immediately." Daniel didn't open it. "Reassigned to what?" Monroe's tone didn't change. "Administrative leave, pending internal review. There's concern that you've exceeded operational authority, accessing classified systems without authorization, contacting restricted entities." Daniel let out a low, humorless laugh. "You mean I got too close?" Monroe's expression flickered, just for a moment, with something like pity. "You should take some time off, Hurst. Walk away while you still can." Then he turned and left. Daniel stood there for a long time, the sound of the rain swallowing the world. When he finally opened the envelope, it was exactly what he expected. A formal suspension notice. No accusations, no explanations. Just silence disguised as procedure. For days, he didn't leave the apartment. He slept little, ate less. He spent his time watching the city move without him. People walking, laughing, living their small, unexamined lives. He wondered if any of them knew how much of their world was built on lies. He thought of his father again, of that old line about truth being armor. Maybe that had been wrong. Maybe truth wasn't armor at all. Maybe it was glass, transparent, fragile, and easy to shatter once it became inconvenient. But even glass, when broken, can cut. The first message came 2 weeks later. A plain envelope slipped under his door. Inside was a single flash drive and a note in block letters. "You were right. They're not done." Daniel stared at it for a long moment, then plugged the drive into his computer. The screen flickered. Dozens of encrypted files appeared. Offshore account statements, email logs, and scanned documents with government headers. One name repeated through them all: North Star Capital Partners. And beneath it, in smaller type, another name: Project Paragon. He didn't know what it was, but the amounts involved were staggering. Hundreds of millions redirected from defense budgets to untraceable destinations. And one of the signatories on the transfer documents was a name he hadn't expected to see again: Martin Crowe. The man was still in custody, but the digital signature was active, which meant someone had access to his credentials. Someone was using him as cover. That was when Daniel realized the truth. The Helms case had never ended. It had evolved. He saved the files, backed them up to an encrypted drive, and erased all traces from his system. Then he picked up his coat, stepped out into the night, and didn't look back. He didn't go to Cole. He didn't go to the IRS. He went underground. He started contacting old colleagues, people who owed him favors, analysts who had quietly left the system for the private sector. Through them, he began piecing together the outline of Project Paragon. It was, on the surface, a research initiative, a fund for technological innovation in public defense infrastructure. In reality, it was a laundering network that moved federal money into private accounts through a chain of shell corporations. Crowe had been just one cog. The real operation reached into government, banking, and even international trade. And at its center, a name Daniel hadn't seen in over a decade: Raymond Helms. The CEO himself, the man who had vanished after the trial, claiming ill health, retreating to a life of quiet philanthropy. But Helms wasn't done. He had simply shifted his empire into a new disguise. By now, Daniel knew he couldn't go back to the agency. His suspension would never be lifted. The people funding Project Paragon were the same ones pulling strings at the top. He worked alone, in shadows, following the digital scent of money through encrypted channels and offshore accounts. Every discovery drew him deeper, and every layer peeled away revealed another lie. He began to change. His apartment darkened, his sleep vanished. He stopped shaving. His reflection looked less like an investigator and more like a man haunted by the ghosts of the truth. But he couldn't stop. Not now. Not after seeing the scale of what he'd uncovered. One night, at 2 a.m, he received a call from an unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. A woman's voice came through the static. Calm, urgent. "Mr. Hurst, my name is Elena. I used to work for North Star. I know what they're doing." Daniel straightened. "Where are you calling from?" "I can't say, but I can help you. They're watching me too." He hesitated. "Why me?" "Because you're the only one who won't sell the truth." Then the line went dead. He sat in silence, the city outside glowing like a constellation of lies. For the first time in years, Daniel felt fear. Not for himself, but for what he now represented. A man who knew too much, hunted by those who had everything to lose. But beneath that fear, a strange calm settled. This was his purpose now. Not revenge, not redemption, but exposure. The numbers had led him this far. They would lead him the rest of the way. He packed a small bag, grabbed the encrypted drive, and stepped into the night. By dawn, he was gone. No forwarding address, no trace, just a ghost following the money. One last time. He didn't disappear because he was defeated. He disappeared because he finally understood that truth couldn't live in the light. Not yet. And somewhere, in the growing darkness, the next move was already waiting for him. The city had changed, but its heartbeat hadn't. 5 years can remake skylines, erase names, and replace empires, but New York's pulse, that low electric hum of ambition and deceit, was eternal. When Daniel Hurst stepped out of the cab at Lexington and 45th, the morning light cut through the high-rise towers like surgical glass. He stood for a moment on the curb, hands deep in his coat pockets, letting the noise wash over him. The sound of horns, heels, and a million private conversations blending into one anonymous roar. No one recognized him. They never did anymore. The newspapers had stopped printing his name years ago. The story of the honest accountant had faded into a cautionary tale, one of those brief bursts of moral heroism people reference when they want to sound principled. The world had moved on, as it always does, but Daniel hadn't. He couldn't. Because the story wasn't over. Because truth, once unearthed, never sleeps again. It festers. He'd spent years tracing the rot that Project Paragon had left behind. He had lived like a ghost. No address, no official records, working under aliases, sending encrypted files to journalists who didn't have the courage to publish them. The deeper he went, the more invisible he became. Somewhere along the way, Daniel Hurst, the accountant, had disappeared. What remained was a shadow with a ledger of lies. But he was back now. Because he had found something that couldn't be ignored. It started with a name. Elena Torres. The woman who had called him in the dead of night, then vanished as suddenly as she'd appeared. For years, her voice had haunted him. Because you're the only one who won't sell the truth. He'd tried to find her before, to no avail. Every lead ended in silence. Until 3 weeks ago, when a tip from a contact in Zurich reached his encrypted inbox, a banking log flagged under her credentials, newly active after years of dormancy. The location? New York City. If she was alive, she was still running. But if she had resurfaced, it meant one thing. Project Paragon wasn't just alive, it was evolving. That was why Daniel had returned to the city. Not for revenge, not even for justice, but for confirmation. The kind that could only come from staring the devil in the face. He moved through the streets with deliberate calm. The man he once was, the careful accountant who'd believed in systems and law, had died long ago. What replaced him was quieter, colder, shaped by exile and obsession. The coat he wore concealed a small recording device and a concealed drive encrypted beyond government-grade standards. His eyes scanned reflections automatically, windows, bus mirrors, metal doors, cataloging every movement around him. Years of being hunted had taught him that safety was an illusion bought by vigilance. He arrived at the building listed in the bank log, a boutique financial consultancy on the 32nd floor of a glass tower near Grand Central. The plaque by the elevator read, North Star Capital Partners. The name hit him like an echo from the past, so it hadn't died. It had simply changed skin. The receptionist greeted him with the polite indifference of someone trained to screen ghosts. "Do you have an appointment?" Daniel smiled faintly. "No, but you'll want to tell your manager that an IRS liaison is here for a compliance matter." Her expression faltered. She hesitated, then picked up the phone, murmured something, and motioned him toward the lounge. "Someone will be right with you, sir." He nodded, sat, and waited. The lobby smelled of leather and glass cleaner. A muted TV played financial news, the same jargon-laced optimism he'd spent half his life decoding into lies. Then, the elevator doors opened. A woman stepped out. Black suit, sharp eyes, no visible fear. It was her. "Elena," Daniel said softly, rising to his feet. She froze mid-step, as if the sound of her name had reached her from a grave she thought buried. For a second, the mask slipped. Shock flickered. Then she smiled. Controlled, professional. "I'm sorry," she said carefully. "Do I know you?" Daniel tilted his head slightly. "You used to. You called me once 5 years ago. Told me the truth doesn't sell." She blinked slowly, the facade cracking. Her hand trembled slightly as she motioned toward a private conference room. "Let's not do this here." Inside, behind glass walls and soundproofing, Elena shut the blinds. The city vanished, leaving them in a quiet cocoon of shadow and tension. "I told you never to look for me," she said, voice low but sharp. "I didn't," Daniel replied. "The money did." She exhaled, walked to the corner, and leaned against the wall. "You shouldn't be here, they'll know." "They already do," Daniel said. "They've been following me since I landed." Her eyes flickered. "Then you're insane." "Probably. But I didn't come for you. I came for Paragon. Tell me it's over." She hesitated, the silence stretching between them like a fault line. Finally, she shook her head. "It never ends. It just changes names." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Who's running it now?" She hesitated again. "You don't want to know." "Try me." Her voice dropped. "Helms." Daniel felt the world narrow to a single heartbeat. "Raymond Helms is dead." She laughed softly, the kind of laugh people make when they've run out of hope. "That's the beauty of power. It never really dies. It just reincarnates through paper trails and signatures. He's alive, Dan, not as a man, but as a ghost in every system you thought you buried." She slid a flash drive across the table. "This is everything I have. Names, shell accounts, encrypted transfers. But once you open it, you can't go back." Daniel stared at it. The same weight he'd felt years ago settled over him again. That impossible, intoxicating gravity of truth pulling him downward. "Elena," he said quietly, "why are you giving me this now?" She met his gaze. "Because they're coming for me tonight, and because you're still the only one too stubborn to look away." By the time he left the building, the sun was setting, slicing through the glass towers like molten steel. He didn't look back. The flash drive in his pocket felt heavier than a weapon. He returned to his temporary apartment, a sparse rented unit on the Lower East Side with walls the color of exhaustion. He locked the door, drew the blinds, and powered up his laptop. The drive contained a single folder labeled Paragon Rebuild. Inside were documents, correspondences, and financial ledgers linking North Star Capital to defense contracts, research divisions, and private donors. The same structure as before, only bigger, bolder, and protected by layers of government endorsement. But one document stood out. Helms Initiative, confidential, Phase 2 implementation. Daniel clicked it open. The plan was chillingly elegant. A new iteration of Paragon, disguised as a cybersecurity defense project, laundering federal funds through digital infrastructure startups across the U.S. The oversight committees were fake, the audits fabricated, and the signatures familiar. Martin Crow, still in prison, yet signing off on million-dollar authorizations. Daniel scrolled to the metadata. The author field read, R. Helms. His pulse quickened. He wasn't chasing a ghost anymore. Helms was alive, or at least someone using his identity with full access to the old Empire's network. And worse, he was building something larger. He barely noticed the knock at his door. It came softly at first, then again, louder. 3 rhythmic taps. Daniel froze, hand hovering over the laptop. The hair on the back of his neck rose. He glanced at the clock. 11:42 p.m. No one knew where he was. No one should have. The third knock came, sharper this time. "Mr. Hurst," a muffled voice said through the door. "Federal Marshal's office, we need to speak with you." He didn't move. The voice came again. "It's regarding your former employer. Please open the door." Daniel's mind raced. Marshals didn't show up at midnight for polite chats. He quietly unplugged the flash drive, slipped it into his jacket, and turned off the lights. The apartment fell into darkness. He crept toward the window. 3rd floor, narrow alley below. Not ideal, but survivable. Then the sound came. The soft, metallic click of a lockpick. He didn't think. He moved. The next seconds blurred into instinct. The crash of the window, the cold rush of air, the thud as he landed in a puddle below. Pain shot up his leg, but he pushed it aside, running through the alley, heart pounding like machinery. Behind him, a door slammed open and voices shouted. Footsteps followed. He turned the corner, darting into the crowd of late-night pedestrians, disappearing into the chaos of the city's heartbeat. He didn't stop until he reached the old East River docks. The rain had returned, light and relentless. He ducked under the awning of an abandoned warehouse and leaned against the wall, catching his breath. The flash drive was still in his pocket, intact. He looked out across the water, dark, infinite, full of secrets. Somewhere beyond that horizon, people were still moving money, rewriting laws, building empires out of other people's blindness. And now they knew he was watching again. Hours later, when the rain finally eased, Daniel slipped into a payphone booth, one of the few still standing, and dialed an old number from memory. It rang twice before a groggy voice answered. "Cole," came the voice, older now, but unmistakable. "Hello, Agent," Daniel said softly. There was a pause. "Christ, Hurst, you're supposed to be gone." "I was," Daniel said, "but something followed me back." Cole sighed audibly. "What have you done now?" "I found Paragon again, and this time it's wearing a government badge." Cole's tone hardened. "You need to walk away." "I can't." "Listen to me. These aren't just crooks in suits anymore. You're dealing with state-level operations. If you push this, they won't just discredit you. They'll erase you." Daniel smiled faintly, though his voice carried no joy. "They already did." Cole was silent for a moment, then spoke softly. "You're on your own, Dan." "I always was." The line went dead. When morning came, Daniel was already on the move. He switched hotels twice, changed phones, and uploaded fragments of the Paragon files to multiple encrypted servers across continents. If they came for him again, they wouldn't be able to bury the truth completely. He knew what he was now, a liability to everyone, including himself. But he also knew something else. The only way to bring down a system that feeds on shadows is to drag it into the light. He began to plan, carefully, methodically, not just exposure, dismantling. He needed names, confessions, proof that couldn't be denied, and that meant one thing: finding Raymond Helms. Weeks later, a message appeared on his secure terminal. No sender, no subject, just one line: "He's not dead, he's waiting for you." Attached was a photo, grainy, captured from a security camera at a private airfield in Virginia. A man stepping out of a jet. Gray hair, familiar posture, the unmistakable tilt of arrogance Daniel would have known anywhere. Raymond Helms. Alive. Daniel stared at the photo for a long time. his hands trembling slightly. The storm that had begun years ago was circling back. He slipped the photo into his pocket and stood. The city outside was alive with movement. Taxis, lights, the endless murmur of ambition. Somewhere among them, Helms was rebuilding his kingdom. And Daniel Hurst, the man once fired for being too honest, was coming to burn it down. He didn't return for redemption. He returned because he finally understood that truth was not a virtue, it was a weapon. And he had spent too long sharpening it. The photograph lay on the table for a long time before Daniel touched it. The paper was cheap, the ink slightly blurred from humidity, but the image burned like truth. A grainy silhouette stepping down the stairs of a private jet, the silver tail glinting under floodlights. Raymond Helms. 5 years older, a little heavier perhaps, but unmistakably alive. Daniel's breath came slow, deliberate. He'd told himself for years that the man was dead, that the ghosts he'd been chasing were only systems and signatures. But here was flesh, blood, arrogance, and memory, back from the grave like unfinished business. He poured himself a drink, not out of celebration but out of ritual, the kind of small gesture that marked the beginning of something irreversible. The glass trembled faintly in his hand as he looked through the window of his hotel room, the Manhattan skyline glowing like 1,000 eyes watching him back. Helms was alive. And that meant everything Daniel had done. Every sleepless night, every friend lost, every risk taken, had been for nothing. The serpent had simply shed its skin. He swallowed the whiskey, cold and bitter, and set the glass down. Then he opened his laptop. The first file he pulled up wasn't financial. It was personal. A note he'd written to himself the night he'd first disappeared. If you come back, make sure it's not for revenge. Revenge blinds. Truth endures. He stared at it for a long time before closing the document. He wasn't sure anymore which of those two he was after. 2 days later, he was in Virginia. The airfield from the photograph was tucked between pine forests and forgotten roads, a place for people who never wanted to appear on records. Daniel rented a car under a false name, a nondescript black sedan that matched 1,000 others, and parked half a mile away from the perimeter fence. From the ridge, he watched through binoculars as a convoy of SUVs pulled up beside the hangar. Men in dark suits moved with quiet precision, security earpieces glinting in the sunlight. Then, from the jet, the man himself descended. Older, yes, but still possessing that same imperial grace. Raymond Helms. He walked as though the world still owed him something. Daniel's jaw tightened. He took a slow breath, lowering the binoculars. He didn't move for a long while, just watched, letting the anger settle into something colder, a stillness he'd learned in exile. Helms wasn't just alive. He was thriving. Later that night, Daniel parked across from the gates of a luxury estate hidden deep in the hills outside Arlington. Security cameras watched the entrance, but he'd studied their blind angles for days. He didn't intend to break in. Not yet. He only needed confirmation. He waited. Just past midnight, a line of cars appeared, headlights slicing through the darkness. One by one, they rolled into the property. Daniel's lens caught the license plates, the faces of the drivers. Politicians, corporate executives, one he recognized instantly. Monroe, the internal affairs agent who'd suspended him years ago. Daniel's hand clenched around the camera. It wasn't a coincidence. It was an ecosystem. Paragon had never been dismantled. It had been absorbed. He returned to the city before dawn, the roads empty, his mind racing. He uploaded the photos to an encrypted server, cross-referencing the names with corporate filings, donations, and contracts. Each connection formed a new line on the map spreading across his screen, a spiderweb of influence that reached far beyond finance, defense, energy, politics. Every thread led back to the Helms Foundation for Ethical Innovation, the kind of name that would make even cynics smile. Daniel leaned back, the irony twisting in his gut. The man who had destroyed lives in the name of profit now ran a non-profit. He didn't know whether to laugh or scream. The following week, he arranged to meet someone, a journalist he trusted, one of the few who hadn't sold their conscience to corporate media. Her name was Maya Trent, an investigative reporter known for chasing stories that made enemies. They met in a coffee shop near the East River, the kind of place where no one looked at anyone for more than a second. Maya arrived wearing a black coat and a tired smile. "You look worse than your photo," she said. Daniel returned the smile. "That's because the photo was taken before I knew the world was rotting from the inside." She sat across from him, pulled out a recorder. "You said you have something big." He nodded, sliding a drive across the table. "Project Paragon. It never ended. It just evolved. Helms is alive, and he's using government infrastructure to launder billions under the guise of cybersecurity defense." Maya raised an eyebrow. "You have proof?" Daniel met her gaze. "Enough to burn half of DC." She hesitated, then took the drive. "If this is real, it's dangerous." "I'm counting on that," Daniel said quietly. She studied him for a moment. "You're not doing this just for justice, are you?" He didn't answer. She leaned back. "All right, I'll start digging, but if this goes the way I think it will, they'll come for both of us." Daniel gave a faint smile. "Then at least we'll finally be telling the truth together." 3 days later, she was gone. Vanished. No calls, no messages, no trace. Her apartment was found unlocked, laptop missing. The news didn't mention her disappearance. The world didn't care about another missing journalist. Daniel did. He tore through his contacts, retraced her steps, hacked into surveillance feeds. The last footage of her was leaving the cafe that night, alone, calm, unaware she was already being watched. Then she disappeared into the static. He sat in his hotel room, the screen flickering with her frozen image, and felt the guilt settle in like lead. Everyone who touched the truth seemed to vanish. He thought of Elena, her warning. "They're coming for me tonight." And now Maya. The truth was becoming a curse that consumed everyone who reached for it. Daniel spent the next week in hiding, switching locations every night. Sleep came in fragments, haunted by faces. Elena's, Maya's, Crow's, even Helms, all of them blurring into one continuous nightmare. But nightmares, like debts, demand payment. One night, his encrypted phone buzzed with a message. "If you want answers, come alone. Pier 17, midnight." No signature. But the style, the phrasing, it felt like her. Elena. He debated for an hour before deciding. The risk didn't matter anymore. The truth had already stripped him of everything worth protecting. He went. The pier was abandoned, swallowed by fog. The water lapped softly against the pylons, the city lights distant and hazy. Daniel stood in the mist, coat collar turned up against the cold. Then he heard it. Footsteps, light and quick. "Elena?" he called. A shadow emerged. It wasn't her. It was Monroe, the agent from Internal Affairs, the man who'd suspended him. "Hello, Daniel," Monroe said, stepping into the light. His expression was calm, almost sympathetic. "You've been busy." Daniel's jaw clenched. "Where is she?" Monroe sighed. "Gone, like the others. You should have stayed away." "I've heard that before." "This isn't about you anymore," Monroe said. "Paragon is bigger than you, bigger than me. It's not corruption. It's infrastructure. You can't fight what's built into the system." Daniel's voice was steady. "Then I'll tear the system apart." Monroe studied him for a moment, then reached into his coat. Daniel tensed. But instead of a gun, Monroe pulled out a small envelope. "What's this?" Daniel asked. "A warning," Monroe said quietly. "They know you're here, and they're not sending lawyers this time." Daniel opened the envelope. Inside was a photograph, the same as before, but new. Helms, standing outside a glass tower, shaking hands with a senator. Beneath it, scrawled in red ink, "Phase 3 begins in 2 weeks." Daniel looked up. "Why give me this?" Monroe's eyes flickered with something close to regret. "Because once I believed the truth mattered. You made me remember what that felt like." Then he turned and walked into the fog, disappearing as silently as he'd appeared. Daniel watched him go, the photo trembling in his hand. Phase 3. 2 weeks. It wasn't over. It was escalating. Over the next days, Daniel went to war. Not with guns or politics, but with information. He broke into networks he once swore to protect, hijacked databases, leaked fragments of Paragon's infrastructure to independent watchdogs across the world. He knew the price: exile, imprisonment, death, but truth demanded payment. And yet, for every leak he made, the system adapted faster. Articles vanished, servers were scrubbed, whistleblowers recanted. It was like trying to fight the tide with bare hands. He grew thinner, paler, the weight of years pressing down on him. His reflection in the mirror looked almost unfamiliar. A man consumed by purpose, a ghost chasing light in a room full of mirrors. But he couldn't stop. Not now. Then, one night, as he was packing to move again, his computer beeped. An incoming message. From an anonymous source: "We have Helms, evidence secured, location attached, bring everything." The coordinates pointed to an abandoned corporate campus outside Baltimore. Daniel stared at the message, heart hammering. It could be a trap. It probably was. But if it wasn't, if it was real, it was the ending he'd been chasing since the night he'd been fired. He packed the drives, the notes, the camera, and drove into the night. The campus was vast, glass and steel half swallowed by weeds. The sign at the gate still bore the old name, Helms Industries. Daniel moved carefully, flashlight cutting through the dark. His footsteps echoed through empty halls, the air thick with dust and history. He reached the main atrium, where once a giant portrait of Helms had hung. Now it lay on the floor, cracked down the middle. Then he heard it. A voice, faint, raspy. "Daniel." He turned. Helms stood by the staircase, older but unbroken, a faint smile on his lips. "I wondered how long it would take you." Daniel froze, disbelief mixing with fury. "You're supposed to be dead." Helms chuckled. "Death is a matter of paperwork. You of all people should know that." Daniel stepped closer. "You destroyed everything. You used the system to wash blood and money. And you made me the fool who believed truth could win." Helms tilted his head. "And yet, here you are, still chasing ghosts." "I'm not chasing," Daniel said. "I'm finishing." He pulled out the flash drive, the same one Elena had given him. "This ends tonight." Helms smiled faintly. "You think you can end something like Paragon with a file? It's not a company, Daniel. It's a language, a system. Cut one node, another appears. You can't kill an idea." Daniel's voice dropped to a whisper. "No, but you can kill its author." For a moment, the air between them froze. Two men bound by the same obsession, mirrored on opposite sides of the moral divide. Then lights flared in the windows outside. Engines. Voices. Helms smiled wider. "Looks like we have company." Daniel turned toward the noise. SUVs pulling into the lot, men spilling out with weapons. "Quietly." "I didn't have to," Helms replied. "You've been their bait for years. They let you live because you make the hunt interesting. Daniel felt something inside him crack, a mix of rage and exhaustion, of truth finally turning to ash. The windows shattered as armed men stormed in. Daniel ran. The next minutes blurred. Shouts, gunfire, the thunder of boots on concrete. He darted through the corridors, adrenaline replacing thought. He reached a side door, kicked it open, stumbled into the night. Behind him, explosions tore through the building, the empire burning itself alive to erase evidence. He didn't look back. He just ran until the city lights swallowed him whole. When dawn came, he was gone again. No trace, no record. The media reported an accidental explosion at a decommissioned facility. No names, no suspects, no truth. But somewhere, in a dozen encrypted servers across the world, fragments of Project Paragon began to surface. Anonymous leaks, unverified data, a digital ghost whispering through the cracks of power. And in a quiet cafe in Lisbon, a man with gray hair and tired eyes watched the news and smiled faintly. The war wasn't over. But the truth had survived. For now, that was enough. He'd learned that justice wasn't a verdict, it was persistence. And sometimes, the only way to serve it was to become the very ghost the world could never silence. The sky over Lisbon was the color of bruised metal, half dawn, half storm. Daniel Hurst sat at a cafe terrace overlooking the Tagus River, a newspaper folded neatly beside his untouched coffee. The city around him was waking slowly, the hum of scooters and the scent of wet stone drifting through the air. The world kept turning. It always did. He had been here for nearly a year now, moving between names, between shadows. The cafe owner called him "Oh Professor" because he carried notebooks and read in silence. It was a harmless lie, one that gave him peace. The locals didn't ask questions. He liked that. After all the years of interrogation, exposure, and betrayal, silence had become his last luxury. But silence also had a weight. He still dreamed of New York, the ticking of that old office clock, the smell of rain on glass, the sound of his own voice the night he refused to alter the books. He dreamed of Maya's laughter before she vanished, of Elena's eyes full of exhausted defiance, of Crow's pale hands in handcuffs, of Helm's smile in that burning building. He woke from those dreams not in terror, but in a kind of hollow ache. Not all ghosts scream. Some just stare. A waiter passed by, murmuring, "Tudo bem?" And Daniel nodded. "I'm fine." He wasn't, but he had learned to wear that phrase like armor. He looked out at the river again, where sunlight was breaking through the clouds in hesitant strokes. Lisbon shimmered like a half-forgiven sin. He thought of what he'd done, leaking Paragon, tearing down names no one would ever publicly accuse. The files had spread like wildfire for a few weeks, headlines in anonymous corners of the internet. Then, like all inconvenient truths, they'd been buried under new scandals, new wars, new distractions. Justice, he'd learned, didn't come with trumpets. It came with the slow erosion of lies. And yet, sometimes, late at night, he opened one of his hidden terminals and watched as the files still circulated in the dark corners of cyberspace. Shared, copied, analyzed. Little pockets of resistance. People whispering about reform, about oversight, about courage. The truth hadn't died. It had mutated, just like Paragon once had. But this time, it was on his side. He sipped the cold coffee. Across the street, an old woman hung laundry on a balcony, humming softly. A boy chased pigeons through the square. Life, unremarkable and beautiful, went on, untouched by the storms that had consumed him. He envied them, the ones who didn't know how fragile truth was, how easily it could be rewritten. The bells of São Vicente tolled the hour. 8 o'clock. Daniel opened his notebook. Inside were no numbers now, Only words, observations, reflections, fragments of thought. It was the closest he'd come to confession. On the first page, in careful handwriting, he had written, "Truth without compassion becomes cruelty. Justice without humility becomes vengeance." He stared at that line a long time. He didn't know when he'd written it. Perhaps it had come one sleepless night when the weight of everything threatened to crush him. His hand trembled slightly as he wrote again, and yet silence is also a kind of lie. He closed the book. The rain began, soft at first, then heavier, drumming against the awning above him. He didn't move. Rain had always followed him, from New York to Vermont, from Washington to Lisbon, as though it were the only witness left to his choices. He remembered the night of the raid, the thunder over the IRS building, the night Helm's empire fell, the smell of burning circuits and lies. And then, the night of the explosion. He could still see Helm's face, illuminated by the flames, calm even in defeat. "You can't kill an idea," he'd said. Daniel had believed him. For a time, he'd believed that Paragon, greed, deceit, systemic rot, was invincible. But now, sitting here, watching an ordinary city wake beneath an ordinary rain, he realized Helms had been half wrong. You can't kill an idea, but you can replace it. It begins quietly, a seed planted in the conscience of someone who reads the right leak, or remembers the right face, or refuses to falsify one more ledger. It spreads the way truth always spreads, invisibly, relentlessly, through the stubborn hearts of people who refuse to look away. That was enough. Maybe he didn't need statues or vindication. Maybe survival was the only monument that mattered. He stayed at the cafe until noon. When the rain finally stopped, the streets glistened with reflection. He left a few euros on the table, tucked the notebook into his coat, and began to walk. The air was heavy with petrichor and sea salt. The world smelled clean again. He wandered through narrow streets until he reached the overlook at Miraduro da Senhora do Monte. The city stretched beneath him, red rooftops cascading toward the river like a living mosaic. He could see ships in the distance, cargo freighters, fishermen, the small white wakes of ferry boats crossing to the other shore. He'd chosen Lisbon because it was a city built on ruins, rebuilt again and again, after fire, after quake, after empire. It understood endurance. It knew how to wear its scars without shame. Maybe that was why he'd survived here. A voice startled him from behind. "You always come here when it rains." He turned. It was her. Elena. She looked older, thinner, but alive. She wore a long coat, damp at the shoulders, her hair pulled back the same way it had been the day she'd handed him the drive. Her eyes, though, they were different now, softer. "Elena," his voice caught in his throat. They thought so too," she said, finishing for him. "But ghosts have a habit of surviving." He laughed once, quietly. "Seems we both do." She came to stand beside him at the railing, their reflections merging in the puddled stone. "I saw the leaks," she said. "You did it. You really did it." "It wasn't enough. It never is," she said softly. "But it was something. People talk now. Quietly, but they talk. You started that." Daniel shook his head. "The world forgets fast." "Maybe," she said, turning toward him. "But forgetting isn't the same as erasing. Sometimes, a truth just needs time to grow roots." They stood in silence, the wind tugging gently at their coats. He looked at her. "How did you find me?" She smiled faintly. "I didn't. You left breadcrumbs, encrypted trails, phrases in the leaks that only someone who knew your patterns would recognize. I followed them." "Then you're as reckless as I was." "Maybe, but I owed you a goodbye." Her words lingered between them. A goodbye. He didn't ask where she was going. Some questions are better left unanswered. She reached into her pocket and handed him a small flash drive. "It's clean," she said. "Something new. Something worth finishing." He took it, feeling its weight, lighter than he remembered, yet heavier somehow. "What's on it?" "Names," she said simply. "Not the powerful ones. The quiet ones. The ones who helped without asking for credit. The ones who still believe it matters." He nodded slowly. "Why give it to me?" "Because you'll know what to do with it." For the first time in years, Daniel smiled. Not the hard, thin smile of irony, but something softer, almost human. "Maybe I will." She smiled back, turned, and began to walk away. "Elena." She stopped, looked over her shoulder. "Do you ever regret it?" Her eyes met his, steady, kind. "Regret is for people who had a choice." And then she was gone, her figure fading into the labyrinth of the city. Daniel stood there for a long time, the wind carrying the scent of the sea. He turned the flash drive over in his hand, then slipped it into his coat. The sun was breaking through the clouds now, scattering light across the river like spilled gold. He felt its warmth on his face. He thought of his father again, of those old words he'd once believed so completely. "The world can bruise you, but it can't pierce the truth." Maybe that wasn't true. Maybe the world pierced everything eventually. But sometimes, just sometimes, the truth learned how to bleed without dying. He walked back through the winding streets, past old churches and street musicians, past the echoes of languages he couldn't name. The city pulsed around him, imperfect, beautiful, alive. He didn't know what he would do next. Maybe he'd send the new file to someone who could use it. Maybe he'd let it rest. Maybe he'd finally let himself rest. But as he reached the corner where the cobblestone street met the tram line, he stopped. A poster on a wall caught his eye, a newspaper headline in Portuguese: "Government to investigate defense budget discrepancies." Beneath it, a single quote from an anonymous source: "The truth is patient. It waits." Daniel stared at it, and a small, almost imperceptible laugh escaped him. The truth waits. He stepped onto the tram, found a seat by the window, and watched the city roll by, sunlight flickering on wet rooftops, strangers smiling, the rhythm of ordinary life moving forward. The bell rang, and the tram began its slow climb up the hill. As it turned a corner, the river came back into view, gleaming under the new sun. Daniel reached into his pocket and felt the flash drive, small, fragile, indestructible. He whispered to himself, so quietly that no one could hear. The numbers never lie. And this time the words didn't sound like armor. They sounded like peace. He closed his eyes and let the light fill the space where anger used to be. There are people who build empires out of deceit, and people who burn them down with truth. But the rarest are those who walk away after the fire, carrying nothing but silence and the faint hope that someone, somewhere, will remember why it had to burn.